Alrighty. Hey, gang. Welcome back, you guys. Another episode of Stove Chat, episode 9. How are you guys? Hopefully you're having a good day. Hope this is working. It looks like, oh, wait. There we go. Looks like I just connected. I just got, uh, just shows me that there's 5 of you here. Oh, all right. Tall Shadow. I see your chat. Okay, cool. Yeah, I had a little chat disconnected message. Looks like I'm good now. So, you guys can see me? You can hear me? All good? Hey, Pete. Right on. Everyone's here. Augustus, hi. Right on. Gang's all here. Killer. Glad to see you guys. Hey, Celtic Bear. Right on. Right on, right on, right on. So happy to see all you guys. This is awesome. Well, welcome, you guys. Welcome back. Another Wednesday, another Stove Chat. Hey, Walter. Hey there. All right. Okay, thanks, Tall Shadow. Got you all good there. Great. Okay, yeah, my stream status just flipped over from bad to okay. It doesn't like this low bit rate, so it always tells me it's bad at first, and then it eventually accepts it. So, Doug, 90 degrees in New Hampshire, no heater needed. No kidding, bud, no kidding. Look at my windows out there. It's glorious. As a matter of fact, I have a new feature for you guys today. It's just I'm just playing around. But check this out, you guys. Oh, I forgot to add my microphone to it, so you won't be able to hear me for just a sec, but I will add it. Here, wait, I'll do it right now. I'm having fun with this whole deal here. So, here we go. So, now I'm back. Fish weren't visible, but they might come out later. So, hope that worked on your end. It looked cool from here. So, how are you guys? Did you have a good week? Hopefully, you guys have been plugging away at your firewood piles. I have been. I cut down another tree yesterday. I'm ready to split. Um, yeah, did that pond show up there, Celtic Bear? Is that what that nice is about? I hope so. So yeah, so I've been plugging away on firewood, been plugging away on stove stuff, been talking to you guys, some of you guys on the emails. Got some great interaction from a lot of you. Thank you guys so much for all your comments and just the interaction. I really appreciate it. Um, so last week was cool, huh? That was really interesting just to have someone to talk to, and Mike is so full of great experience and information. Hopefully that worked out well for you guys on your end. I'd like to do more of those. I realized once I got done that I hadn't really allowed much time for questions and stuff, and it was apparent to me afterwards that you guys had some stuff you wanted me to cover. So in the future, I'll do some of those things, but maybe I'll try and do like a Q&A first and then bring the person on live or whatever. But I'd like to do more of those. So Pete asks, in your house stove, primary and secondary air inlets are separated, if I remember correctly, but in the boiler, seems like all air comes in through the same opening, and I guess is divided internally. Does that work evenly good? And Augustus says Mike was a great guest. Mike was a great guest, wasn't he? He's a great guy, and I knew he'd have a lot of pertinent things to share that you guys would find interesting, because it's it's nice to come across somebody who has real world experience living with a rocket mass heater in various applications, not to mention his humanitarian stuff and everything else. So, Mike, if you're listening, that was awesome, bud. Thanks for doing that with me. So, Kolnitsky, yo yo yo. So, Pete, great question, and it's so fitting that you should ask that, because I was just about to refer back to Tall Shadow, who asked very much or something along the same lines, and Tall Shadow, I didn't really know what your question was. I read your email, but at any rate, I'm being mysterious. Pete, Tall Shadow had emailed me and asked me about the same thing. He didn't realize that my plans actually include that combined air, primary and secondary air, but he was commenting on Peter's use of the combined air in his newer plans. And so I don't remember what your question was, Tall Shadow. Maybe you can give me some insight into what you were asking me about those things. I don't remember what you were asking. maybe it just, is it different? I don't know. So anyways, Walter Vaughn says, I know you have covered sourcing materials in a video a few years ago, but I'm trying to find ceramic fiberboard and shipping is crazy. Yes, that's what I covered in my video, Walter, was that shipping is crazy. And it's mostly crazy if you try to buy this stuff online. You know, if you just get on the internet and you find ceramic fiberboard like at Amazon, you're going to pay through the nose. And so in my material sourcing video, I said, try and find an industrial supplier close to you that you can talk to on the phone, talk to a human. They're not really set up for internet email stuff. You want to call them. If they're close enough, within an hour or two, it's worth driving. If they're not, then they're going to set up shipping and it's going to be on a pallet and it's going to be expensive as all get out. But if you buy from the industrial supplier, they will ship it on a pallet and you can buy like 8 or 10 boards and get it shipped for $100 instead of $100 per board like you'll get from an online supplier. So hopefully that helps, and I can go into more details there, but now I'm going to go back and catch up here. So Tall Shadow says, I noticed that you keep the primary and secondary air separate and control them manually at different times, and have often wondered what your take was on this. And Augustus Smoothie says, I paid $17 per square foot at the local refractory store for 1 inch thick. So that's... I haven't bought for a little while, Augustus, but I was able to source it for closer to $10 a square foot, but that's been a year or two, so it might be changing. And then Tall Shadow says, also in your secondary air video, you mentioned that you close off the secondary air port around the cooling phase, but you don't say anything about when you close off the primary air opening. And Tall Shadow says, don't see any flaps on your stove to open close the air ports. Do you just use a plug? So yeah, Walter, give that a try. To answer both of your questions, so Pete says, does it work evenly good? Does it work evenly well? Yes, I think that the combined air and the separate air work equally well. So the way that came about, it was a few years ago on Donkey's board, and there was a fella building a door, and he had really good metalworking skills, and he built one big air setting and had the secondary air behind it, and that was when Peter started to refine that inner flange and come up with the threshold. He had some parameters. I'm not sure if he still uses them in the plans, but with regards to height of the threshold and secondary air, primary air coming in and hitting secondary and pushing up over. And while that was all in development, we were all sort of working on that together. And so actually, Tall Shadow, for a few years now, my plans have incorporated that same system, but I have only built doors for myself, and so they're all smaller doors, and so they incorporate the dual air system. But in the plans, I'm using larger off-the-shelf doors made by Pisla in Finland, and those have, an air inlet that is the right size for the sum of the air. So in my plans, I do a combined port. So, Pete, your question is, do they work equally well? Yes, I think they do. I think that the combined port is a little bit easier to control. You control them both at once. Peter is of the opinion, and I tend to agree, that as you close that down, as the thing's burning hotter, it's going to prioritize the secondary air, since the air coming in is cooler than the air inside the firebox. So that air will sink to the bottom, which is where the secondary air's intake is, and then the excess will kind of blow over the top of the fuel and be the primary air. So it's kind of a self-limit, or a self controls the ratio between primary and secondary sort of automatically. As you close it down and the stove becomes starved for air, it starts to prioritize secondary air, just due to the nature of the temperatures and the stratification going on in there. Hey Jacob, nice to see you too. So that's the biggest difference between the primary and secondary really is just, or by having a single or dual controls, is that with having that single door control, you just have a much easier, it's just a single thing to control. Now in my stoves, I actually don't really close the secondary air. I think you might have gotten that backwards. I close the primary air. I may have said it backwards, but I tend to close the primary air, and I do it. You said there was no flaps or anything. I just use a plug. I've got a little piece of ceramic fiberboard that I cover with that foil tape, like flue tape, and that just makes a nice little plug that doesn't, the tape keeps it all so it doesn't dust. And that's just been easier for me. I've built sliders in the past, and sometimes they get, there's different kinds and hot, and I just have my simple aluminum door on there, and so I've just been using a plug. Now, like I said, in my plans, I recommend, since metalworking is kind of like fine metalworking is beyond most people's skills. I can cobble together a reasonable door. If I really work on it, it could come out okay, pretty nice. But it takes a bit to build a real good door. So my plans have those pre-built doors, and so they use, since I'm limited on what their air intake is, I have to, I adjusted to make sure that it's a dual air intake. Hey, David Swanson, welcome. So I hope that maybe those answers you think. So basically, let me just sum that up. I don't think there's a significant performance difference in terms of one makes the stove run better or not, or more flexible. They don't really offer too much of that, although my dual, supposedly there's more flexibility, I guess, with two inputs, but I don't use them that way because I always leave my secondary air open. It would be prudent to plug it when it was out all the way, but I just never do. So that, I think, you guys can hit me back if you got more questions. Hopefully the stream is still streaming good. I've got an okay on my stream status, so Tall Shadow, I hope those internet lagging is not on my end, or not too bad on my end. But so that's my thoughts on the secondary and primary air, whether they're combined or separate. I think it's really a function of what door you have available, how big its air opening is, whether you want to build, if you're building one from scratch. My way was really easy to build by just keeping them separate. So Augustus asks, do you have an idea of what gases stay where if unmixed in the burn path, and how that affects where to have your secondary air input? Augustus, thank you, first of all, for that donation, or whatever we call that. I really appreciate it. And so it's a tough question. It's going to be specific. Are we talking about a J? Are we talking about a batch? Those types of things. Those are going to dip. That the answer is going to depend on that. And so, where to have your secondary input? I feel like you just want to stick to whatever the plans are with the existing cores. You won't make any improvements by trying to just insert some secondary air here or there. But I will tell you that the general rule of thumb is that you want to have your secondary air come in prior to all of your mixing elements of the core. In other words, prior to like the port and the riser where the ram's horns, the double vortex forms, that is a mixing element. So you want your air and your fuel to basically enter the mixing and combustion portion of the core at the same time. You don't want to add air later, and you don't want to inject air into those areas, because you will be missing part of the mixing, and you will be missing part of the temperature raising of that air. So it's important to put that in early in the process. Get it in there with the wood gas, get them both preheating and mixing, and then deliver those to your combustion and mixing chamber. So hopefully that helps, but I'm again going to encourage you, don't play with those secondary airs. In other words, you'll only go backwards almost 100% for sure, and you won't know either way without a testo. So not to be a stick in the mud, but just saying, it's a really tough thing to discern secondary air stuff, positioning and all that, and there's huge differences. If you go back and watch some of my development videos in 2012 or 13, or read some of the stuff on Donkey's Forum, you'll see that it's incredibly I'm not trying to say it. Low tolerance, I guess. Small changes make big changes. So Jacob says, is there any difference in two primary inlets and their placement if size would be equal to one center positioned? Of course, their placement on front door. Any difference in two primary inlets and their placement if size... Well, Jacob, I'm not exactly clear on your question, but when I'm talking about the way that I have configured the secondary and primary air inlets, I'm going to just turn this camera so you can see the ones on my door there. Okay. So, oh, I always do this wrong. I can't even point the right way. Let's see. This is so hard. Okay, so secondary air is below, primary air is above. That secondary air is mounted to what I call the door flange, right? That's the backing to the door. So if I wanted to make that dual input, all I would do is I would make that door larger so that it enclosed the secondary air. So it was this big, down here. And then this opening's position, it does matter where it is. It needs to be in the same location. So it needs to be basically right where it is now, and then bigger by pulling it down so it's also in front of the secondary air, ideally. So hopefully that makes sense. I see. The reason is we've got really nice fireplace doors with bottom placed 2 inlets. Right. No, it matters very much where they go, but you place the door in front of the door flange. The door flange has the secondary air inlet down here, and then the opening for the firebox there, and the primary air comes in and goes over the flange up into the fuel. So it's possible that your configuration could work because you're not feeding right in the firebox. What I'm trying to say is you're feeding into a little chamber before the firebox, behind the door, in front of the flange. And it's hard to say if your doors would work. There's only one way to find out, really. That's to try them and see if they're suitable. You might be able to, adapt the flange and those things to make them work. But it sounds like those openings, if they're near the bottom, they might be close enough. So Tall Shadow says, all very clear, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, Tall Shadow. I hope that did make sense to you. So, yeah, you can. I'll just leave the door there. Left and right position. Yeah, Jacob, it might work. It might work out just fine. Like I said, you can see it in my door there, and hopefully that helps you understand. That door is going to cover that piece behind it, and you just kind of want to feed air into that lower area. So it might work. Might work. So David Swanson says, make a door out of 060 thick steel plate size to about 1 inch larger than the opening. Drilled a hole and used a jigsaw to cut the window opening slightly smaller than the glass. Cool. Right on. That's a cool way to do that. So Pete, the brand of those finished doors is Pisla, Pisla. And I think the one that I like is, I want to say it's the 426. But they have quite a few different options. But there's one that's just about right. It's just, I can't remember the size in millimeters, but it's just about the right size, and it has one big air kind of opening right at the bottom that is really just about right. So, reading your... Yeah, David, yeah, that's a great way to build a door. Yeah, that's perfect. Very cool. So yeah, that's a good way to do it. Is just you just bend it over with a hammer and use the wood stove door seal rope. There's a lot of simple ways to do a door for sure. A lot of people though, metal work really just puts them off. So and my door, I like my simple aluminum door. That works really well. But even that gives people the willies, I guess. And you can cut aluminum just with regular woodworking table saw and skill saw and stuff. But people just really, everything else in the plan seems doable. But that's why I always try and spec those doors for pre-purchase, if possible. So there was another question that Tall Shadow asked me about. He was asking about another type of secondary air that was being that one fella came up with a few years ago. And Walter says, if anyone ever needs tips with metalwork or welding, please contact me. I'd love to help any way I can. That's really, really nice, Walter. Thank you. Yeah, a resource a lot of us could use. I know that I'm still really bad at it, but I can stick things together. But I really didn't know anything about it, and so that's really helpful, Walt. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to go back real quick, touch on something called the S portal. I think it was called S channel. I don't remember what Sean called it, but at any rate, there is a really amazing rocket stove builder in the Netherlands, and his name is spelled Sjang, I think, is his first name, and I'm not even going to try his last name off the top of my head. But he was on Donkey's board a while ago, and he came up with something called, he announced the S channel. This is a long time ago, 2013 or so. And it was about the time Peter was playing with his first secondary air, and I was just starting to develop the floor version of the secondary air. What it is it's two vertical air delivery tubes on either side of the port with slots, at least they were slots, that allow the air right in as it goes through the port in a batch box. And if I recall, he fed it from the bottom, like a tray across, a plenum actually underneath the firebox, I guess, that would feed those little ports. And he got really good test results, and he started to build his stoves commercial, or he does build his stoves commercially in the Netherlands. And he's also done some workshops here in the States. And he is a cool guy, man. He called me at one point. I don't remember how we connected, but we've talked on the phone a few times. And that his name, if I remember correctly, is pronounced Sean. So it's spelled Sjang, and it's pronounced Sean. And he is, in my opinion, brilliant. If you go to his website, I think it's rocketstove.nl or rocketstoves.nl, something like that. And he just builds beautiful stoves. They are gorgeous, and I believe he's gotten tested and certified, at least for installation in his country. And so the S portal is just another variation on the air delivery system. I did build one. I did play with it. At the same time, I was testing all of the air intakes. It didn't work for my the type of burning or the way that my stove was set up. It slows things down greatly. It likes to run at a much slower rate. Sean tunes his stoves. Like I said, I think he's certified, so I don't really have much details to give you on it other than we played with it. I definitely ran one for a little while, actually, if I remember correctly, and I posted about it on Donkey's board quite a bit. But it didn't seem to be a major improvement. It was harder to build. It was in a tough spot. So when it started to deteriorate, it was going to take a lot more to replace. So there was some upsides and downsides, but it didn't really seem to be significantly different or better for us. I think for Sean it might be it is a better solution for him in his builds, and I think he's had great success with it, and it's pretty cool. But like I said, I think the biggest thing was that it's kind of difficult to build, and then to replace it, you have to do that again over and over again. So and I'm gonna toot the horn of mine a little bit, and it's not because I came up with it, but there's a really important thing that the pre-port vertical tube does that none of the other ones do, and that is keeps the wood from blocking the port, and makes sure that all of anything that does get passed is burned completely, because the air comes in there and just basically blow torches, blast furnaces, the ash right there. So it keeps the port clear. And I know Peter has switched to the floor channel, and I think that's a big part of the reason why, is that in day-to-day use, as important as the secondary area is, the role of that thing is protecting the back of the firebox and keeping that clear is just as important. So the floor channel has a lot of benefits that are more than just puts the air right there. The temperature, the protection there, the simplicity. I could go on and on. So one little Indian says, I'm interested in the way Donkey did a door from a glass lid, no hinges, just an angle to place the door in. I'm glad you asked, one little Indian, because that's a terrible idea, and I would like to caution you against doing that. So I love Donkey. Kirk, no offense. It wasn't a terrible idea. It's a great idea originally. I had the same idea in like 2012. And I did it until they explode violently and spray that glass everywhere. And it will happen at some point. They're usually Pyrex, borosilicate, whatever they might be, but they just don't handle those fast temperature changes very well. And at some point they'll get compromised and then they explode violently. Not only that, there's no real way to hold it once it gets hot, the glass, so you'll end up dropping it. Do not recommend. Worst door idea ever. Don't. And like I said, I did it right out of the gate. You can watch an old video from 2012. I think it's my very first rocket mass heater video with the cat and my big cob one. And I have a casserole lid right there on it, and I'm talking about it. And then in the next video, I explain how it exploded. So be careful. And again, no disrespect to Kirk Donkey. You know, it was a great idea at the time. It's great in the moment. Go ahead and use it, you know, in your build. But the only part that frustrates me is that it was published on a website that is kind of notorious for repeating sort of bad intel, and so now it's just been perpetuated. So, yeah, that's just how it goes. But yeah, don't do it. Augustus, I've seen videos of you using preformed ceramic pieces like riser sleeves. Were they successful builds? Yes, very much so, Augustus. So the preformed riser sleeves, as they are correctly called in the steel forging industry, or foundry, yeah. They're amazing. They work fantastic. The only reason I have a couple still sitting here, I did sell them for a little while, make them available to people. The only reason that I've stopped using them or recommending them is because they're really inconvenient to ship. So like the boards are one thing, right? But those risers, they're pretty heavy and they're big and they cost like $100 to ship every time. And so they work great, but they don't offer a significant advantage over a square riser that you made with boards or a 5-minute riser that you made with a flue pipe and some ceramic wool, cow wool, or whatever you want inside of there. So those preformed riser sleeves are awesome if they're available to you. There's a company in the Midwest. I don't know if any of you are in the Midwest, but there's a company in the Midwest called Firebrick Engineers. They're a refractory supplier, and they sell ceramic fiberboard and stuff like that. But they sell riser sleeves. I was getting 8-inch diameter by 12-inch sections for like $4 or something. So they were super cheap. They were only maybe a 1/2 inch thick, but it was enough that they would work great. But again, they're just really expensive to ship. So they do work well if you have someone near you and you can get them. They're great, but they're not really worth the price if they're the expensive ones. The other ones I bought were like 3 inches thick, and they were really awesome, but they were like hundreds of dollars each. So Pete says, have you ever tested your riserless as an open system the same way Peter Vandenberg can run the DSR? Pete, it'll surely work. I haven't bothered with the Testo, but the Batchbox, the riserless, the DSR2, they're all sort of based on those same principles. They all require, one thing with, one factor of the environment for them to work, and that's significant draft, right? So as long as they have the velocity going past the port or through the port into the riser, they'll work for sure. And so the open door should be no problem at all. In terms of testing, in terms of testing for efficiency, I haven't, and I think what you're going to see there is, again, when Peter does that, you have to keep in mind that he's running it like a dragster, so he's got a ton of air because the door's open, so he's going to fill that thing up with his dry birch kindling. So the only way you're going to get it to burn really efficiently with no door on, since you've got so much air coming in, is to just blast it with wood gas. So you could do the same kind of thing if efficiency was your biggest concern, but I don't really care that much. I just don't want it to be smoky. And So you can burn less wood and it'll actually be less smoky and cleaner. The reason it's not as efficient is because you're just blowing a bunch of air through it and you're also having to heat that air. There's not really much of a downside to that, in my opinion, for cooking, because if you want your temperature hotter, you're just going to add more wood. That air isn't necessarily like cooling off your cooking chamber in a way that you're going to notice. Good morning, Positive Aspect. Welcome. So, in other words, Pete, I think you should feel absolutely comfortable running any batch type rocket with no door. Understand that you're probably going to have excess air. You'll still burn visibly cleanly. The efficiency would be harmed because you're just having to heat up that air that runs through the system, that excess air. But to me, that's not a big deal. So I think, yes, you can run them open. But no, I don't have any definitive numbers for you on that. But it would be as easy as just leaving my door open and I could get some for you. So, but I don't think it's, all I wanted to know when I test those things for efficiency, I just want to know that the core is tuned to its best possible configuration so that it burns all of the carbon monoxide, and then in the different burning modes, at least it isn't blowing smoke. So it doesn't always need to be the most efficient if it's got a lot of air because I'm burning it kind of at a low rate. As long as it's not blowing smoke out my chimney, I'm okay with all that. So hopefully that answers that question. What else, you guys? What else should we talk about? So, last week with Mike on here, I really enjoyed getting to talk about his real world experience with jays and batches. And I'd like to do more guests, and have more dialogue, more conversation. I think it brings up a lot of things that don't come up when we're just chatting like this. So I hope that is something that was valuable to you guys, just having us converse. Once we got done, like I said, I realized I hadn't answered some of your questions. So hopefully I didn't put you guys out or put you off a little, by having someone on here. But let me know if that's something that you'd like to see more of or whatever. I'd like to start to get, some other guests that you folks would be aware of, that some rocket builders, stove builders and stuff like that, and have some conversations. So hopefully we can do more of that in the future. But I really enjoyed that. So let's see. What else, you guys? What else you got for me? Oh, I did just... There's 2 new videos on my channel that were like looking in the riser and looking at a window. And those were old videos that were on my YouTube channel that were posted. And I had them just as unlisted. And then I had used them in posts on Donkey's board back in like 2013 during the development. As a matter of fact, that batch box window in a batch box it still has a top feed air. It's right when Peter's batch box was just being published, and so those had just been unlisted on my channel. So I just made those public. So if any of you guys were wondering like, what the heck is this? Those are just really old videos, and I was just like, I'll just let people watch these if they want to. So maybe that helps. So Augustus says, what's the fun to watch but not efficient build you mentioned? Did I just mention it or was it a while ago, Augustus? I will guess and say something with a big window in it, which could have been the batch box that I just was referring to as well, the window in a batch. So any big windows on the sides of the rockets are really fun to watch. But they do, it's not very insulative, so they do hurt the efficiency a little bit in an email. Yeah, it probably was a windowed. I would imagine it was a windowed version of a J. Yeah, Tall Shadow. It'd be fun to talk to Peter. I think our time we'd have to do a special time, but I'll reach out to him via email and let him name a time and see if he's interested in doing it. I know he's been. I'm not sure how active he is these days. I think his health was up and down a little bit over the last few months. But I'll reach out to him. I'd like to do that. I just wanted to, last week was the test. And I've got a few other folks in mind as well. So One Little Indian, you could do black oven cooking videos. I do black oven in my wood stove, the best flavor ever. I know. I love cooking in the black oven. One Little Indian. And Doug says, I may have missed this in your videos, but why ceramic glass top? Why not iron? Just that glass is easy to recycle. That's a great question, Doug. I'll answer that in a second, too. So One Little Indian cooking videos. Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Um, I just, let's see, how can I explain this? I still do quite a bit of cooking in my black oven. I don't show it very often because there's some of us who totally get cooking in a black oven. It's basically a barbecue smoker. It's my favorite type of cooking. It's my favorite type of food to eat. I have been learning as I've been releasing videos talking about my black oven. You would not believe the number of emails and questions I get from people, mostly in other countries, saying, doesn't the smoke get on the food? What is a black oven? Why do you do that? Did you wreck all your food? How do you bake? And I am constantly having to, explain sort of, I like roasting meat, and this is like barbecue, so the smoke is good. If you don't want smoke on it, they make delightful little covered ceramic roasters that basically are a white oven that you just stick in there. But people have a real hard time with that concept. The idea that a ceramic roaster put in the oven with your food inside, if you're baking a cake, it's in there. The idea that that's somehow the same as a white oven, which is the ceramic roaster just stuck in the stove with the opening to the outside, people have a real hard time with that. And so I have been reluctant to emphasize that I use my stoves as barbecues, because most people don't get it, to be honest with you. And nowadays I've changed the way I eat, so I'm not cooking in a way that most people would think is normal, except for you. So for me to show a cooking video, it's just really difficult for me because I'm just going to show them me cooking a brisket and then eating a few pounds of it. So, I had to change the way I eat. I got real sick, and so I just eat a whole lot of meat all day, every day, and it doesn't translate very well to a lot of the people who, watch my channel. So there's that. There's a good answer for you, an honest answer. So Doug says, asking about the ceramic glass top and why not iron. So Doug, it's a good question. So my choice would be ceramic glass or iron, not steel. People always email me and ask about steel. Steel, I think, is a terrible choice. It moves a lot, shrinks and expands and warps. But iron's stable, and so is glass. So the reason I use the glass is because I can salvage it. It's free, and I like the way it cooks. It heats up so fast. It blasts heat into the room. I think it puts more heat into the room than cast iron, to be honest. I think it radiates more heat. It's a really good material, and it's typically free. So that's why I like the ceramic glass, but I would just as quickly recommend cast iron. Cast iron is pretty expensive, even to find it salvage. People take cast iron tops off of wood stoves and stuff like that, and so it's hard to find for free. But if you got an old cook stove or something like that with a cast iron top, or just a cast iron griddle, makes a great top for a stove. So there's my answer to that. Either is great. So Pete says, I did some adaptations recently, one being lengthening the chimney from 0.5 meter to 1 meter. Massive problems getting it to burn clean. You think that chimney could make a big difference? Chimney is not insulated. Because you made the chimney longer. So Pete, I'm not sure what I think that if I'm trying to picture what we're talking about. I think we're talking about your oven, and I think that you have it possibly like basically directly coupled to that chimney, and so you might just be getting massive draft in that taller chimney. I'm not sure what your exhaust temperatures are at the top of the chimney, but my exhaust temperatures are about 200 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, so like 130 degrees Celsius or something like that. So if you're blowing like 200 or 300 degrees Celsius exhaust temps, you must just be pulling through that firebox so fast and flashing off all your wood. So if the smoke is black, you've got overfueling. So that'd be my guess, but it's hard for me to say without seeing it. That's a tuning issue for sure, Pete, and I know you're trying to do something a little bit unique there. So I think you just got to keep playing with it, and your fuel too. Keep playing with your fuel. If you change the chimney, maybe you have to change the fuel. Maybe you need bigger pieces, or maybe you need more or less. Things like that. So Jacob says, in traditional masonry stoves in Poland, they were putting wood inside oven, then taking it out and putting bread in. Yeah, right. And that's another way to do it. So that's like cooking in the firebox, and I think that's a great way to cook. That's a little different than what I'd call a black oven, and I think that is, the cook stoves like mine, you could actually do both. You could cook in your black oven, and then you could do some baking once the fire had died down in the firebox. And that's another thing about the cook stoves as well, with the black and the white oven, is that they are brick and they do hold heat incredibly well, really stable for a really long time. So the people say, what about the smoke getting on the food? There's, you can use a white oven, you can use a chamber, like I said, like a little cooking container, but you can also just let your fire burn out, and then you would still, for a lot of cooking chores, can still cook for quite a while. Like especially something like bread, it's going to cook for half an hour at 350 or 400 degrees or 425. You can burn some fires, get that thing blazing hot, and then let the fire go out and do your baking. So there's a few options there, and that's another common question I get, is how do you control temps along with the smoke? And so there's so many variables, there's so many ways you can control those things, whether it's the size of the fire, or the type of wood, or the time that you're of the fire that you're in there, all that stuff. So Doug says, I was surprised to see the iron top on Mike's lava rock stove last week. The way that it was mounted looked like it would crack the stone surround. Cast iron is really dimensionally stable. It does move a little bit, Doug, but it's nothing like steel. As a matter of fact, it's not even in the same category, and that's why you often see it, right, in places where it's going to go through a lot of thermal cycling. So I don't know exactly how he's got it coupled there, but a lot of times what I'll do in something like that, and he very well may have done that, is I'll use a little piece of like ceramic wool or something like that to create an expansion joint. And so his was a kind of a domed, like a turned upside down skillet. And so I would set that on some ceramic wool to act as an expansion joint, and I'd put a little more around the edges, and then you could just mortar right over that ceramic wool, and that would probably hold it all together just well. Mortar underneath, set the ceramic wool in mortar, and then mortar it. And usually that little bit of the mortar's flexible, and as long as you have that ceramic wool in there, things usually can move actually more than you would think, without really blasting things apart. But it is interesting, the stone and the steel. So David Swanson says, I'm using your 8-inch riserless CFB with a steel heat exchanger on top, no riser above the riserless into the exchanger, 6-inch diameter steel flue up into the house chimney, fast light and great draw. Interesting, David. Right, no riser above the riserless into the exchanger. Yeah, but you have a flue afterwards. So no, that's right. The riserless doesn't need a riser on top of it. Pete's doing something different. So you have actually a stove, David. You have a stove, and then that radiator is an extraction point, right? So you're pulling quite a bit of heat off of that, and then you're feeding it to your chimney. So you have after draft, you have the chimney draft, and that's probably providing good draft. But that's really how that riserless core is designed to work. Pete, I'm not, I know that you were working on a pizza oven. I know you had these, the outlet of the riserless a little bit different than. Yeah, I don't, I'm not sure what exactly is different there, but it's definitely a different setup. And I think that Pete also doesn't have much of a heat extraction element yet, although I'm not sure about that, Pete. I think maybe you're going into an insulated oven. I'm not sure. Anyways, that's great to hear, David. That's really cool. Love to hear about the stoves working well for people. It makes me so happy to know that they're starting to, you guys are starting to see how they work. I mean, they're just, they're just such a joy. So it's really wonderful for me to get to share them with you guys. So, what else, you guys? Got anything more? Functions as a wood furnace with a fan blowing across the exchanger. Exactly, David. Yeah, that's a really neat way to use those. Hey, Mark. Hello. Non-government. Sure, Mark. Email me. I don't know if you're spam or if you're for real, but go ahead. Send me a message. Pete says Pete's oven indeed. Yeah, white smoke, so the fire didn't get up to temp. No overfueling. Right. Okay. Other way around. 1 meter, the exhaust gases cool way more than in the half a meter, at least in startup phase. So you think maybe you didn't have enough draw? Yeah, that's possible, Pete. That's possible. It's hard. Like, again, it's hard for me to say without seeing it all. But it's interesting. Vegetarian. I'll eat the meat, Mark. It's not spam. Okay, great. I'd love to hear from you about an NGO operation. It was just the way you came on there, Mark. Just I'd like to email you about an NGO. I'd love to hear about it. That's great. Pardon me. We do get lots of spam coming through the chat sometimes, so you never know. So, Augustus, are my new hot water plans large enough to heat a wooden hot tub? Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. It won't be super quick, but yeah, you would just cycle that hot tub water through the internal tank, and man, I think you could heat up a big tank. I mean, it'd be some of the faster wood-fired heating up of a tank you could do, in my opinion, but it would take a little while. Yeah, I don't know, Mark. Are you? We'll see. It's possible, but that's a good one, Augustus. So, but yeah, I think it could, and I mean, actually, I know it could. It's just a question of how long, and that's a question of how big is your tank, and what are you inputting the water temp at? If it's in the middle of winter and the water's going in at 38 degrees, it's going to take a while. If it's summer and the water's going in at 65 or 70, you probably heat that thing up in no time at all. I've actually been kicking that idea around. If I had more water, I'd be into it. I have spring water here, and it's great all summer. I've got plenty, but if I over irrigate or something like that, I can run it low. So I don't know if I'd be able to repeatedly fill a hot tub and use it. Otherwise, I'd probably do exactly that. That sounds like a great idea. Maybe I should just build a little single man barrel and heat that up. That's an interesting idea. Thanks, Augustus. Got my head spinning. Well, all right, you guys. I think that's probably enough for today. I'm going to wrap it up, and unless you guys have some more questions, but I think we've been going for just about an hour here. So, Mark, you can just email the channel. You can just email me on YouTube there. You can send a direct message or send an email, and that'll get right to me. I get lots of emails through the channel. I'll be sure to reply to you. So don't leave a comment though. Send me a message. You can do that on the channel page, I think. Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Augustus, Tall Shadow, David, Mark, Pete. Whoever I'm not seeing, Doug, Walt, all of my friends here, Positive Aspect, Jacob, Celtic Bear, whoever else I'm forgetting, Hugh, good to see you. Thanks you guys so much for listening and watching, and let's take one more look at those koi. Let's check out the koi cam. I must have run the battery down. I'll have to work on that for next time. So thanks you guys. Really appreciate it. Always learning. Good to see you. And let's do it again next week, huh? So next Wednesday about noon, we'll do it again. All right, you guys. Have a great week. Stay healthy. Stay safe. I'll see you really soon. All right, you guys. Talk to you later.